Hey guys, this video is going to be the unpopular opinions book tag. Doing this feels kind of abnormal for me because I tend to not focus on more negative things. I typically try to focus on things that I like instead of things that I don't like, just because I want to be more positive. I'm not always, but I try to be. But for this video, you've been warned, I guess. So for this one video, I'm probably going to be a bit more negative than normal. And I'll just go ahead and apologize in advance if I insult anything that you like. Please don't hate me for it. First question is a popular book or series that everyone else loves but you hate. This is hard because I can't really come up with an answer. I have a complicated relationship with Twilight, but it doesn't really fit this. I'm kind of lukewarm towards Matched, but it's not really hate. I have read the first two. I plan to read the third. It's just kind of neutral feeling for the most part towards it. Second question is a popular book or series that everyone else seems to hate but that you love. The thing I keep thinking with this question is that if it's popular, then doesn't that automatically mean that lots of other people like it, even if some people don't? Kind of Twilight again, but like I said before, that's kind of complicated. I could probably do a whole video on my relationship with Twilight. Moral Instruments gets a lot of flack from a lot of people though, I know, and I'm kind of in love with it. I cannot stress to you how important of a character Alec Lightwood is to me, and I'm just so grateful that these books exist for him alone. I love other aspects of it too, but just Alec is my all-time favorite character ever. Question: a love triangle where the main character ended up with the person you did not want them to end up with, or an OTP that you don't like. Almost 100% of the time, characters actually end up with who I want them to end up with. I can only think of one instance where they didn't, and that's Uglies by Scott Westerfeld, this series, not specifically this book. And warning for spoilers for the entirety of this series, including extras if you haven't read them. I hate David. Hate him possibly more than I hate any other kind of romantic lead in a series, except for maybe Edward Cullen. And Tally doesn't end up with him exactly. It's kind of ambiguous, but Zane is dead at the end of Specials, and so that's and that's who I wanted her with, most definitely. It's funny because in Pretties, the second book, I hated Zane. But then by Specials, I hated David from the beginning too, just so we're clear. I hated both of them and didn't really care who she ended up with because I hated them both. But then by the end of Specials, I really, really loved Zane. He grew on me so much, and I still hated David. And at the end of Specials, Zane is dead and she's going off with David, and even though they're not together romantically, you know that it's going to go that way once she's mourned Zane. And extras, you get to see more of their relationship developing, and she's still not with David, even I can't remember how long after Specials extras takes place, but I think it's at least a couple years, and she's still not with David because she's still upset with Zane, but she's beginning to move on, and you know that it's really close in extras, so you know that she's going to end up with David. And it's not that I have a problem with her getting over Zane's death and moving on. That's not the problem. She has every right to do that and everything. I just hate David, and I don't want it to be with David because I hate their relationship. I hate everything about them together. I hate David as a character. Tally, I'm neutral towards, but lean more towards dislike a lot of the time, and I just hate them together more than I have possibly ever. And it sucks because I wanted her with Zane, whereas in Twilight, where I didn't like Edward, but I didn't want Bella with Jacob either, so I didn't really care that she ended up with Edward. I care in this series, and it annoys me so much. I have honestly never been so angry about the romantic outcome of a series than I was this one. Somehow I still love these books, mostly for the other characters. I think it does help that even though she ends up with David, he's not really in the later two books that much. And like I said, I do like Tally some of the time, and I like the other characters, and I like the story, but romantic wise, they just did not, I just was not happy with how that went. Question 4 is a popular genre that you don't reach for often. This is not exactly answering the question because this isn't, I don't know how popular this is, but I'm gonna say historical fiction. This is actually really different from the question because I actually really like historical fiction. I just don't read it that much. I actually think that the reason I don't read it that much is because it's not that popular, so I don't hear about historical fiction books that often, and then I don't, like, they're not in my mind, so I read others instead that I hear other people talking about. So actually, like, this is kind of different from the question because if it was more popular, then I would read it more, and I want to read it more, but I'm so bad about seeking it out when I hear all these other great things about these other books and other genres that are more popular. There's not really a popular genre that I completely dislike because I tend to be pretty open towards reading all sorts of genres. There are the ones that I like reach for more, but I think I tend to like most genres. I just don't read as much of them because I don't hear about books in them as much, like with historical fiction. Question 5, a popular or beloved character that you dislike. I actually have quite a few possible answers to this, but the thing is, there are plenty of beloved characters that I dislike, but I wouldn't say that I hate them. I'm just kind of, with most characters, I either love them, like them, or I'm just neutral towards them. I don't tend to hate characters. I have like a very short list of fictional characters that I really, really hate, and like I don't really consider it hating unless they're not a villain, because if they're a villain, that's kind of different. I think like everyone hates them. So as for like non-villain characters, I really don't hate that many, but I do feel less enthusiastic about some than most other people seem to. Bella and Edward are like really good answers to this. I'm not that fond of them, but I know like among Twilight fans that's probably an unpopular answer, but amongst the general public that's probably not like a popular or beloved character. And then Snape is probably like the other biggest answer I could have for this, but again, I'm not sure how popular or beloved he would be considered because I know that he has fans and everything, but I also know that plenty of people dislike him like I do. But they're the like 3 characters that immediately come to mind as people that have like really, really core groups of people who really love them, who when I say bad things about, I know I could be offending someone because they love that character. Question 6 is a popular author that you just can't seem to get into. I honestly cannot come up with an answer to this question. I think the bigger problem I have is not actually getting around to reading authors that everyone is talking about. There are plenty of authors that I've heard so much about and I haven't read them yet because I'm so bad at like keeping up on that sort of thing. So there's all these authors that I've heard so much about and I have no idea how I feel about them because I have yet to actually read their books, and that's a much bigger problem for me than disliking authors that everyone else loves. But since I'm an English major, I'm gonna go with a more like author his works are like considered classics, so I have to read them a lot in my English classes and my literature classes and stuff, and that is Ernest Hemingway. I get why his books are classics on like one hand, but I just can't get into any of his stuff. Some of it's better than other stuff, but like Old Man and the Sea is ranks on one of the worst books that I've ever read, like enjoyment wise. I won't argue about like its literary merit or anything because I don't want to get into that, but just like purely from enjoyment's sake, it was terrible. And I feel as an English major, he's one of those authors that I feel like I should appreciate more than I do. Like, appreciate him to a certain extent, but not as much as other people. And I do get personal pet peeve, but like people who complain about like Jane Austen because she writes about things that aren't like really important and things like that, like, and then Ernest Hemingway has like, I really hated Old Man and the Sea, if you can't tell from this. Like, he has an entire book that is about an old man fishing, and I understand that there's more going on with the book than that, but from like a very, very simplified summary of the book, that's the only thing that's happening. And I feel like Jane Austen, like, you can't diss Jane Austen for her books because like she has more stuff going on there too, even though like there is like a shallow way to interpret everything, just like there is with Ernest Hemingway, and I just hate that he gets put up so high when, like, in comparison to certain other authors, especially like female authors, when like I just don't find any of his stuff enjoyable. That turned into a more intense rant than I expected, and I feel like I could get a lot of hate from that, but that's personal opinion. I think he's a good author, just not as great as sometimes he is portrayed, and I kind of feel like I'm missing something sometimes with him. Question 7 is a popular book trope that you are tired of seeing. Insta-love. Insta-love is my immediate answer. And I know a lot of people who talk about how that's like kind of accurate towards teenagers, because teenagers like will immediately think that they're in love with someone because of hormones and all of that. And I get that. Like, I completely understand that point of view. The thing is though, like in books they're always portrayed as like, yes, this was totally right and we're going to be together forever, or like, I mean, that's not always outrightly stated because the book ends and like you don't know how what the relationship does afterwards, but I still can't get past the point that it's like, oh, we're soulmates and we immediately knew it. And like, I'm not like a love at first sight person. I think it's stupid, to be completely honest, and I'm not saying that insta-love isn't always, like, sometimes it's accurate towards things that teenagers do and things teenagers think probably more than actually are feeling, but if I have to choose how my romance is being portrayed in a book, I would much, much prefer, like, actual development and not insta-love, because isn't that part of, like, the fun of a book is like actually watching them fall in love with each other instead of them just automatically being in love and then being in love for the rest of the book. I'd like, as frustrating as it can be sometimes when like characters take forever to get together, that's like part of the story, and I don't like skipping that and just having insta-love, and it annoys me so much. Also love triangles, and that is self-explanatory. I don't think I need to go into that anymore. And overall, just kind of the emphasis on romantic relationships over friendships. I feel like friendships are sometimes really, really discounted in books, and I'm not dissing, like, this isn't anything against like particular books. I have no problem with romance books. I read romance books, and like so much of YA and so much of the books that I love involve romance. Most of my like absolute favorite books aren't specifically romance, but a lot of them have romance in them, and there's nothing wrong with that, and I also do enjoy reading like complete romance books. But just overall, in like the great span of things in books, especially the books that are most popular, romance is focused on a lot more than friendship, and that upsets me sometimes, because some of my like favorite relationships between characters are friendships as opposed to romantic relationships, and I love, love, love great friendships in books, and I just wish that that was focused on more than it is sometimes. Question 8 is a popular series that you have no interest in reading. This is something where I'm too curious of a person to really have an answer for this, because like I'm the type of person that if I have like some fleeting thought about something and I realize that I don't know the answer to it, I have to immediately Google it, because if I don't know the answer to it, it will bother me forever, like for days, until I actually like Google it. And along the lines of that, when I hear like tons of things about a book, I really, really want to read it. And there's only one exception to that I can think of, and that is 50 Shades of Grey. And that honestly just occurred to me. I was trying to think of an answer to this question earlier and couldn't come up with anything, and then I just thought of 50 Shades of Grey, which is actually the perfect answer, because I have no interest in reading it. There's a big part of me that is very, very against that book purely because it started off as fan fiction. And as someone who is a fan fiction author and who like reads fan fiction and has since I was like 11 or something around there, I feel uncomfortable with the idea of a fan fiction becoming a book. And like I said, I haven't read 50 Shades of Grey, but I've heard a lot of things about it, about how obviously it is Twilight put like with humans and in like a slightly different setting and everything, and like more adult. And it just bothers me. That bothers me a lot. It really, really does. And along the same lines of that as After, which started off as Harry Styles fanfiction. I have a lot of problems with that book too. I know, like, there are other problems that people have with 50 Shades of Grey and After, especially with After, like, and the potentially problematic parts of their relationship. Like, I haven't read that either, but, like, the potentially, like, abusive parts of that. And so that's definitely, like, another jar of worms that I probably wouldn't be able to deal with. But just purely from the fact that they started off with fanfiction, I just can't get behind that. Especially, like, it's one thing to have something start off as fanfiction with fictional characters and, like, taking people, and that raises copyright questions, and I just, like, don't feel good about that. But then also with After, the fact that it was originally written about Harry, and, like, this has nothing to do with real person fan fiction, which I think is, like, a completely different sort of thing, but making it like an actual book just makes me uncomfortable, especially one where he is portrayed like that. So yeah, either one of those will work, and I can't believe I didn't think of them earlier. And the 9th and last question. The saying goes, the book is always better than the movie, but what movie or TV show adaptation do you prefer more than the book? I quite honestly don't think I have one. There are a lot of adaptations that I think are really great adaptations and I really love, but I don't think I like any of them more than the book. One series that does come to mind is Ouran High School Host Club by Bisco Hattori, because this is an anime as well as a manga, and I watched the anime first, and it was also the first anime I ever watched, so I do have like a special attachment to the anime because of that. But this was also the first manga that I really read, so I have a special attachment to the like manga too, and it's not so much like liking the anime more, just that I like really love the anime, and I do appreciate that there's like more to the story in the manga, and I definitely like appreciate the manga in different ways than the anime, but I do have like a really like special kind of feeling towards the anime because it was my like first experience with the story. So that is all of the questions, and if any of you would like to do this, feel free to, and let me know that you did in the comments because I would love to check it out, and I will see you guys later. Bye.